Just to speak on it, my name is Malik. Today is Friday, June the 18th. Today, we have a lot that we thought we was going to present. But after having a meeting with Amari, and after listening to some of the stuff he was giving me an update on, and after experiencing some things as it relates to what this technology can do, I think we're going to cut it significantly. Because for the last period of time, we've been doing extended programs time-wise. And I think the intent was to get out as much information as possible, knowing that because of the pandemic situation, you might not be able to do it because they might have to go on a lockdown again. So you wanted to have as much information here. But what I have discovered more clearly is that it's interesting. He was telling me how this system works by whoever. It's probably an AI system with these trigger words. And there are words you can use. And then that allows some creature to say you verbally bullying someone. Now, those of us that know a little bit understand that words only make up 7% of the communication process. You know what I mean? Nonverbal makes up 55%. So the other part of that is 45%. It's just what it is, verbal. But in the equation, what really goes down is the tone of voice. See? So if you take the tone of voice and you use so-called NIGGER, they can say, well, you bullied. Because if you amplify, I want you to understand what's happening here. And that's really for the folks that be programmed for the future, but it won't matter because, they'll be already programmed. But it's a hell of a system. It's more than censorship. It's behavior modification. So society has been forced under a behavior modification mode that somebody invisible somewhere can say, well, I don't like the way he said that his tone of voice is too rough. His tone of voice is woo. We don't like the way he looked. He looked like he's strong. He looked like he's a bully. He don't smile. He looked like he got a frown. So we can't let you out of that. We had a show the other day. Over 3 hours. Can't nobody see it. Because I say often, I don't own no videos that you see. I don't own no music. I ain't trying to make one penny off of nothing. That don't matter. So one of the big line gate management, and I see that. I look at a lot of stuff on them rerun stations, and line gate be up there, and I don't know if the same people or not. So they say, well, you use something about 3.5 minutes or something. They don't even tell you what it was. But you didn't have permission, so we blocking the whole damn thing. Can't nobody see it nowhere. The only person can see it is you. Okay, I hear you. So that means it's really a waste of time to do too much of anything unless you're going to just be somebody talking. Then when you're just talking, then people want to challenge that because they have fact finders. So you can't even come from the hood and say, look here, we're going to have a hood conversation. Because they got somebody sitting somewhere saying, no, that don't sound right. They don't know whether it's right or not. They don't even know what you're talking about. But that's the system. So I will say this. The Negro, and I guess I might have to stop using Negro if I want to be in the public view. Because they might see that as a bully. Because somebody else is uncomfortable with the word. Man, the society you're going into, it's going to be interesting. But today we wanted to really, and we will, talk about Juneteenth, 2021. Emancipation Day, 1865, down there in Galveston. Actually, a couple of years earlier, according to the paperwork, but it didn't get to that particular area until then. And as I'm talking now, I'm actually deliberating on whether or not I'm going to even look at much of that, because it makes no sense to get out information, but the more information you get out is more ammunition for them to find something to block it. Because any of the videos have some type of music in them. So if you tell them you don't have permission, they know you don't have permission, because number one, you don't know where to get it, because there's nothing on the YouTube, there's nothing on the Facebook where the articles running that say, look at here, this is how you contact to get permission. But now all of the garbage you see and hear, I guess they're not subjected to the same process. And it ain't like I'm a crybaby, because really I understand. I mean, it's your thing, and I understand. You still got that Hoover mentality, but it's even more intense now. They will be sure that no serious-minded, serious-talking person, that they don't like that person's style of presentation, have audience. That's serious. Very serious. And I know I'm that type of dude. You will not feel comfortable with me. Number one, my voice. Number two, my posture. Number three, my words. But I truly don't believe in bullying. I don't. I have a very hard time dealing with any of that insanity that we see so much of. But now that after we had the meeting and I was talking to him, I will begin to not censor, but begin to reconsider, but not to the extent of not doing it. Because what they want to do is discourage you if they can't intimidate you, if they can't bully you. See, that's what it is. So now you speaking, now you're doing a program under bullshit. Because anything you say, any way you look, somebody or something, somewhere, might be artificial intelligence, like I say, the trigger word. Then it said, no, we can't have him on here. We can't do this and that. Hell of a thing. But then those of us from old school, we do understand what that's about. That's about control. That's about checking you. And I understand. And that's some stuff we got here. You know, today, I'm really looking at it. There's a piece, and I have nothing political or no agenda or nothing as it relates to the man or anyone else. But there's a piece here that Tucker Carlson did about the man. Now, I got it off of Facebook. And that's how I use it. I ain't talked to him. I don't know whether or not you got permission. But I know that somebody will be offended by it. But it's running for him. And like I said, some of the Juneteenth pieces, they have music in them. Question is, do I want to gamble and don't have a program because there's some music there that gives them opportunity to abort what you're trying to do? And I think at the end of the day, Amari, I don't want to gamble like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to deal with, when we get to that, we will probably just do the only piece as it relates to Juneteenth. This is crazy as hell. Because what happens is it throws us too far off. Just run it, Amari. Go on, start off with Biden, and we'll see what we got. And then take the camera off of me because I got to get this other outline.
People. And it's not going to be fulfilled so long as the sacred right to vote remains under attack. We see this assault from restrictive laws, threats of intimidation, voter purges, and more. an assault that offends the very democracy, our very democracy. We can't rest till the promise of equality is fulfilled for every one of us in every corner of this nation. That, to me, is the meaning of Juneteenth. That's what it's about. So let's make this very Juneteenth, tomorrow, the first that our nation will celebrate all together as one nation. A Juneteenth of action on many fronts. One of those is vaccinations. Tomorrow, the Vice President will be in Atlanta on a bus tour helping to spread the word, like all of you have been doing, on life-saving vaccines. And across the country this weekend, including here in Washington, people will be canvassing and hosting events in their communities, going door to door, encouraging vaccinations. We've built equity into the heart of the vaccination program from day one, but we still have more work to do to close the racial gap in vaccination rates. The more we can do that, the more we can save lives. Today also marks the 6th anniversary of the tragic deaths at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. Killer, motivated by hate, intending to start a race war in South Carolina. He joined his victims in a Bible study class. Then he took their lives in a house of worship. It's a reminder that our work to root out hate never ends, because hate only hides. It never fully goes away, it hides. And when you breathe oxygen under that rock, it comes out. That's what we must understand, that Juneteenth represents not only the commemoration of the end of slavery in America more than 150 years ago, but the ongoing work to have to bring true equity and racial justice into American society, which we can do. In short, this day doesn't just celebrate the past. It calls for action today. I wish all Americans a happy Juneteenth.
Now, I want to commend the House and the Senate and the President for doing this. But at the risk of being blocked, I'm going to connect the dot to this time last year. It appeared that the last administration had just discovered Juneteenth as it relates to the leadership.
Work on that day.
And it was a lot of discussions about Juneteenth. And it got more airplay than I had ever seen it get. And now, this year, it has become a federal and state holiday. Now, is there a connection? Because it does matter. You know what I'm saying? And your little trigger words, or whatever words you got, it is what it is. It do matter. There is a connection between the discussion last year, this time about Juneteenth, and the reality this year of Juneteenth. Now, my tone of voice is what it is. Now, you don't have to like it, and you can say it's a whatever. But the truth is, all of these years, all of these different administrations, and now, thanks to the Biden administration, because basically the same senators was there before last year, but definitely last year for the most part. The same House members was there before last year, basically. So really what changed? Could it have been because of the discussion last year? But you see, I don't call other dude's name because I understand that's a trigger. Because since he's been banned, and I'm sure that's a trigger. And I guess y'all say, dude, you trying to get jacked. No, I ain't trying to get jacked, but I don't go out like that. It is what it is. No, I'm not going to bully nobody, but I'm not going to be bullied. I'm not care. No, I ain't going. But I will look at it. Now, here's something, and I hope it's okay by these people. They put it on Facebook, and it's relevant. 92-year-old man. I would not have put my relative, maybe not, but he got something to say. But it seemed like, somebody gonna say you had something there, you abused the elderly because you got him eating and looking like that. I did not I'm presenting something that was presented to me that had nothing on it saying you can't use it. But his message is one of the last messages that you will hear from somebody that know like he do because he's 92. Come on with it, Brother Amari.
Celebrated 19th of June as when the slaves, we wouldn't work on that day. We would always celebrate. People would kill cattle and barbecue the night before and have a big baseball game and make ice cream cones and have a stand with soda water. But we had a time on the 19th of June.
Well, how did you feel? How did you feel when you heard they made it a holiday?
Almost on the cry. So when I got to Chicago, the people from Mississippi, they didn't know what 19th of June was because the white folk didn't tell them they were free. They didn't know they had been freed. That was in the 50s when I got in Chicago. They had to escape from the plantation. They had to escape at night.
Now, that's good history. But, you know, they got some God-appointed somebody that will say whether or not that's appropriate. But his message, he's my grandfather, or at least my father's generation. And I remember the soda water. I remember how they used to make ice cream. You know what I'm saying? I remember what he said. But he remembered more of it because he was here when they had to escape. So Juneteenth, for those of us from Texas, have always been something that we celebrated. But up north in Chicago, I have witnessed and seen over the years how when Juneteenth came, it was like didn't nobody really care. And a few little activists or those that was awakened, that was tried to carry the tradition, a lot of people wasn't responding. But now it's been resurrected. And that's a good thing. And I want to salute State Rep. LaShawn Ford. You see him up there. He was very instrumental, from what I understand, in networking with, on the state level, for it to be done and become a state holiday. So, Mr. Meyer, would you play that video with the governor speaking about it? No, don't do all that. Man, just follow the script. Follow what you got. I ain't changing nothing. Just go with it. Now, as he finds things, we'll just ad-lib, if you want to call it that. You know, Governor Pritzker and President Biden seem to take a different approach to politics because somehow they are making decisions that others have not been willing to take the chance on. I salute them for that. All right, Amari.
Gordon Granger issued a general order, officially and finally liberating the enslaved black people of Texas, which was the most remote part of the Confederacy, who had still been kept under the whip months after Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox. In other words, it is the day of full national liberation and has been celebrated as such by African Americans for years. Now, there's been no national official holiday to mark this moment, but it looks like that's about to change. Earlier this evening, to loud applause, the House approved a bill to make Juneteenth a national holiday.
On this vote, the yeas are 415 and the nays are 14. The bill is passed.
The bill will now go to President Joe Biden's desk to be signed into law. And while 14 House Republicans voted against the bill tonight, yesterday the Senate adopted it unanimously. Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin had spent much of the last year objecting to it, he said, on cost grounds, but he finally backed down. And if you were surprised that all Republican senators who are simultaneously whipping up a moral panic about race and education would endorse such a holiday, listen very closely to how John Cornyn of Texas explained his reasoning earlier today.
I think everybody saw this as something that would be an important symbolic gesture and a way to reach out to people of different races and to say, I know that Juneteenth has been celebrated within the African American community around the country in Texas and elsewhere. But frankly, this is something I think all Americans can celebrate. And hopefully this will promote greater understanding into the history.
Senator Cornyn, who represents Texas, where Governor Greg Abbott just signed a law today making it harder to teach about the history of white supremacy and racial hierarchy in America, endorses this vote on Juneteenth because he says it is a symbolic gesture. What a tell, what a word to use as justification. This is the game. Here, have your holiday while we attack your right to vote and stop schools from teaching you what Juneteenth is even about or how it came about. It's pretty astoundingly cynical. But another way to see this is as a kind of success for the very forces that Greg Abbott and John Cornyn and so many others say they fear. At some point in time, the simple act of celebrating Juneteenth itself was seen as radical or weird or outside the mainstream of the sanitized story that white historians told about the war and its causes and aftermaths, about the nobility of the Confederacy and the men who fought and killed to preserve the most evil institutions. That version of history lost, at least in this battle for this holiday, celebrating emancipation. The optimistic way to view this contradiction between the attack on education and voting while also endorsing the holiday is that when they say they are losing their country or their vision of it, they are right in a certain way. They are losing. The anti-critical race theory hysteria, the desperate attempts to reduce democratic participation are the activities of a coalition losing the battle of ideas. Let's hope they keep losing.
Today, we are one step closer to a new federal holiday. There are currently 10.
Well, I see myself, so I assume that's time for us to look at this closer. I think I actually understand what the politician was saying.
A bill has been sent to President Biden.
It is a symbolic gesture. You know, you want to be positive, and I am, and I'm thankful. But the truth is, what really will change tomorrow? I mean, come on now. Are Negroes going to really be emancipated? Is any of the things that make us feel that we are still in bondage going to be relaxed? So the man told the truth, but a lot of folks don't want to hear that truth. And the truth is, it is a symbolic gesture. Hopefully, it will become a reality. But let's keep it moving, man. Because I know we got a lot of stuff, and we're going to cut it, but we're going to keep it moving.
A bill has been sent to President Biden's desk to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. The House approved the legislation today, just one day after it passed the Senate. Juneteenth commemorates the day in 1865 when the last enslaved black people in the U.S. learned from Union soldiers in Texas that they were free, more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed.
And today, Governor J.B. Pritzker announced Juneteenth will become a state holiday starting next year. This weekend, Evanston will mark the new holiday with a parade.
With this change, the people of Illinois will have a day to reflect on how the freedom that we celebrate just 2 weeks later on the 4th of July was delayed. to Black Americans.
Near a rare copy of the Emancipation Proclamation, Governor J.B. Pritzker made Illinois the 47th state to recognize Juneteenth as a state holiday. This historic announcement comes as Evanston is preparing to host a parade this weekend in honor of the day. Cheryl Judice is the co-grand marshal. She owns Hecky's Barbecue, where she sells Juneteenth strawberry soda all year round. It was created by her late husband in honor of his great-grandfather, who was born into slavery.
And on the label of this soda bottle is a photo of his great-grandfather, and it says, "A sweet sip of freedom."
Cheryl says her late husband was a longtime proponent of celebrating Juneteenth, and the color of the soda has a special significance.
Now, Juneteenth is primarily celebrated around barbecues and red-colored foods. And of course, red indicates the blood that was shed during the Civil War.
And in honor of the holiday, all flags will be flown at half-staff on Saturday, and a Juneteenth flag will fly over the state capitol. And Chicago's skyline will also light up red.
Well, feel like they're getting quite a bit of information just out of the newscast on Juneteenth. So maybe not. Hit that
Grammarly
piece,
can help you right.
Amari, that talks about what Juneteenth tell us about the values of Black life in America. That sounds safe enough. Let's see, can we play that, and maybe that'll be all we do. Or whatever you got up there, man. Come on with it. All right.
I'm getting notes of bubblegum and cotton candy. Dear Nat and Moby, can you tell us about Juneteenth? From Miss Safford's class. Sure. Juneteenth is short for June 19th. On that date in 1865, enslaved people in Galveston Bay, Texas learned they were free. 2,000 Union troops showed up with the news. The Civil War was over, and so was slavery in the South. The news had taken a while to reach Texas, the westernmost state in the Confederacy. Juneteenth celebrates that day, when the last enslaved people in the South were set free. The Emancipation Proclamation had made it official. That was an executive order issued by Abraham Lincoln in the middle of the Civil War. It said that all enslaved people in the states, in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. Meaning, it applied to the Confederate States, but not to the slave states that stayed in the Union. That's because Lincoln wanted to keep his allies in those states happy. Slavery continued there for months after the Civil War ended. The 13th Amendment outlawed it across the land in December 1865, a half year after Juneteenth. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation was still a big step forward. For one thing, it allowed Black men to enlist in the Union military. Nearly 200,000 Black troops went on to fight for the freedom of their brothers and sisters. But more importantly, it placed the Union squarely on the side of freedom, which meant enslaved people could escape across Union lines, and 500,000 of them did. Every Union victory brought an expansion of freedom. In each area of the Confederacy it conquered, enslaved people were freed. But as Union troops advanced, lots of slaveholders took their operations west. Many found refuge in a place far from the fighting, Texas. Until Major General Gordon Granger came to Galveston on Juneteenth. Standing on the balcony of the Confederate headquarters, he read from General Order No. 3. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. Newly freed people danced, cried, sang, and started to make plans. Word spread quickly across Texas. 7-year-old Molly Harrell was enslaved on a plantation over 200 miles north of Galveston. She said, "Me and my mother left right off. We all walked down the road singing and shouting." If only it were that easy. many white Southerners refused to accept black people as their equals. The most hateful began a campaign of terror, attacking and killing black people across the South. Defying these threats, black Texans observed the first anniversary of Juneteenth. Back then, it was also called Emancipation Day or Jubilee Day. They sang spirituals, ate barbecue, played games, and recited the Emancipation Proclamation, even though the threat of violence was always there. The country passed several constitutional amendments to protect the rights of black Americans. But down south, state and local authorities refused to obey these laws. Instead, they did everything they could to make black people second-class citizens. First, black Southerners were prevented from voting, so they had no influence in government. Then, laws were passed to bar black people from participating in everyday life. They couldn't eat with white people, go to the same schools, or use the same water fountains. Black citizens had to live in separate neighborhoods and could only hold lower-paying jobs. And they had to treat white people like they were superior. Try to fight it, and you risked jail time, violence, and even death. This policy of segregation or separation lasted for 100 years. Still, Juneteenth persevered. Celebrating became an act of resistance and a show of strength, and black communities got creative about making celebrations possible. Because of segregation, many public parks were off limits to black Texans, so they sometimes pooled funds to purchase their own land. In Houston, in 1872, ministers raised money to buy 10 acres, creating Emancipation Park. It became a safe place to gather on Juneteenth for decades. Smaller celebrations were held in people's homes and in churches, too. Juneteenth slowly spread through the country beginning in the 1910s. That was the start of the Great Migration, when millions of black Southerners sought a better life in the North. As people from Texas joined the migration, the holiday went with them. Then, during the 1950s and 60s, Juneteenth got even bigger. Black people connected their fight for equal rights to the fight to end slavery. Juneteenth embodied all of the pain and triumph of their shared history. Celebrations now featured parades and fireworks, street fairs and rodeos, and presentations about black heritage. Red food and red drinks symbolized the blood of the enslaved and their resilience in bondage. And in 1980, Texas declared Juneteenth a state holiday. Since then, 47 states have recognized it as a holiday or day of observance. Yeah, there's recently been a push to make it a federal holiday. That's when government workers get a paid day off, and most everyone else does too, like we have for Independence Day. In fact, some people think of Juneteenth as America's second Independence Day. 'Cause the 4th of July only commemorates when white Americans gained independence, while Juneteenth is about when all Americans became free. Making it a federal holiday may not seem like such a big deal, but what a country chooses to honor and celebrate speaks to its core values. And freedom and equality for everyone are values I think we can all get behind. Nice! You baked a Juneteenth cake. You're not supposed to use actual red velvet. Blech.
Well, I don't have to tell you that I did not have anything to do with producing that video and that information. With that being said, I think that there was a lot of good information that a lot of people otherwise might not know. And that's what we try to do with Retro Current Team. And when you get back into the format of having live callers, it'll be speak on it in that sense. But when you think about the challenge particularly when, it is what it is. And like I said, I'm not going to get off into saying what I said earlier. But that's information that's important. But when you are aware of the fact that there is some big brother or big sister somewhere that determines, without discussing anything, they determine what you can do, what you can present, what you can say, and what tone of voice and what words you can use. That's serious business. Serious business. But those of us, scratch that. I speak for me, although I understand the history of others. I can't get caught up in that. My mission, my ministry, my nonprofit is about teaching. And some of them training. I won't use the other word. I will use it. Some of them tame. There are people that are involved in therapeutic processes that facilitate a taming modality. It's no different. I was talking to someone yesterday, they said, "Boy, these kids are so wild." And I said, well, you have to tame them. You have to calm them down. You got to get them to sit still. You got to hold them and restrain their arms until they understand you can't just run and break out into the street. Then you train them. You hold them and you tell them, you can't do that because of this, that, and another. But somebody could say, since he used the word tame, well, tame is something you don't want to apply to humans. Some people don't even want to apply the word train to humans because they are so limited. And now with big brother, big sister determining what words you can and can't use without being a bully, then they say you teach them. I told you before on this show, I don't like the word show because this is not a show. I don't like the word program because I don't want to be part of that whole possibility of programming somebody with what we present. But team, the T, team. The E, educate, enlighten. Used to be entertained when they allowed you to use music, but then they got so sensitive about that they thought you was trying to make money. But people can get on there and talk about all type of killing and sex, and they be becoming millionaire. Ain't that something? That's a hell of a thing. But we talk about trying to empower people, trying to elevate people, trying to encourage people. And it's like walking on eggshells. Advocate. Yeah. And mentor. Yeah, we do mentor those in a type of presentation where you don't apologize for being a Negro or black or African American. And where you strive to be free, responsible, and accountable using self-discipline. Yeah, that's what we try to do with Retro Current Team. And for these systems that want to say that, we ain't going to show your stuff on CAN TV because of this, that, and other. We ain't going to show it on social media because of this, that, and another. All right, you know what I'm saying? You can do that. But I used to publish a newspaper. I can still do that, but I won't. Do some other things. And until they say you can't do that, there it is. But I'm kicking this because we celebrating Juneteenth. But you just saw in that video what we went through. They weren't lying, man. I grew up drinking out of separate water fountain. I did. I grew up eating. Understand? Going to the back to get in this little, wasn't even a cafe. It was just where the Negroes, that's where we come to town from the field. It was on a dock where the trains came and the mules and the horses came to take the crops that we just got through picking. We couldn't go in no restaurant and eat. We had to eat like the livestock. And I ain't that old. But then again, I have to be careful how I tell you that, because you'll say that I'm amplifying and I'm intimidating. Oh, I lived that. And that animation was the truth, because I have lived a lot of it. And there's a lot of us, like that 92-year-old man you saw in the beginning. A lot of us have lived this. So Juneteenth is not just a fad. No, it's not. It's real. It is something that we learn, Emancipation Proclamation. You used to have to learn that. You know what I'm saying? You did. But then you saw the other video that said they talk it, but they don't particularly want it to be taught in schools. So is that a contradiction? Or is that just the American way? Know about everybody else, but don't know about the Negro. Negro, stay in your place. Now that you got Juneteenth, now you got another reason to go spend money, waste money on fireworks, and disturb the hell out of those of us that live in the colonies, where they will start burning those fireworks. Some of them sound like bombs. And they start doing that, ain't no sleep, don't care about the sick, they don't care about the young, they don't care about the old. They just have a fixation and sensation drive to hear that noise. But if you told them to go to a war like those of my generation, they had to deal with that and you became shell-shocked, they wouldn't go. But over here they think it's fun and funny to make all that fuss. Now they got another day to celebrate with fireworks where they can hide the gunshots. Boy. But they don't want you to tell people that, because you're violating whatever they think you violate. All right, the next piece, Mark, because time is what it is.
Juneteenth
I don't know how you
deeply
do this
emotional
music, man. There's
moment for enslaved people, because for decades, for centuries, enslaved people prayed for, hoped for, fought for in the form of slave rebellions, running away, bought their freedom when they could. And if you read slave narratives, if you listen to spirituals from the era of slavery, you know that enslaved people longed for freedom. This was something that had been hoped for, but many believe may never come.
Well, the master is promised to give me $40 a month in fed. Well, lots of the boys say they ain't want it. They rather go free, you know.
Being able to go wherever they wanted, being able to wonder about. For enslaved people, it was an expression of their freedom.
Well, Matt Porter was the one that belonged to Miss Porter, one of our white folks' neighbors. He come along, we all sitting on the fence, and the colored soldier come along and asked her, did she want to go with him? And she said yes, she mounted one of them horses. She went on with them. I never did see her and hear tell of her no more.
When I think about Juneteenth, I think about it in the context of Emancipation Day celebrations that began January 1, 1863. They took on a whole new meaning when slavery was formally abolished after 1865. You would have had African-American veterans who fought in the Civil War be prominent in these celebrations, dressed in their military garb, speeches from enslaved people, the most prominent Black politicians singing of hymns, spirituals, discussions of registering to vote. Enslaved people celebrating in public their newfound freedom was an act of resistance. Because we have to remember, slavery came to an end after a 4 years bloody Civil War. Still the bloodiest conflict in American history. Many people in the South and in the nation who did not want to see slavery abolished fought tooth and nail to block the 13th Amendment. The abolition of slavery created a huge humanitarian crisis in the South. Suddenly, 4 million people have very little means to take care of themselves, to support themselves, and do so in a really, really hostile environment. So the military was necessary to make sure that enslaved people got the food, the medicine, the shelter that they needed in order to survive. They're also there to protect, to the extent that that was possible, freed people from violence, from recriminations, from slaveholders, from Confederates who still hadn't given up the fight.
And I remember when the Yankees stopped here, and the Yankees stopped back on the corner of the square, and they prosecuting people, you know. We go to the ground team, and they take them, hang them over the slum. That's the punishment they got. Next time you see, they come a whole troop of Yankees, all riding horses, big guns hanging on. I said, Mama, where are they going? They're all going home now.
When the last federal troops leave the South, it's a signal to Southerners. The federal government wasn't going to put its might into ensuring the civil rights of Black people would be observed. You have 20, 30 years later, Black people being lynched in public, and there isn't a federal anti-lynching law to protect them. In most communities in America, there's a history of lynching and racial violence, and very few communities have marked that, commemorated that. Every decade since the end of slavery, Black people have been more educated, accrued more wealth, more status in American society. Every decade since 1865. But there's been one constant, and that constant is the presence of random racist violence. What I see in George Floyd's murder was a white police officer attempting to dominate and to subdue a Black man who was not resisting, who could not resist. Even though slavery came to an end in 1865, the desire to master and dominate Black bodies did not. And we have never dealt with that. These are the kinds of stark realities that are highlighted during Juneteenth. If Black people's lives can be expunged through racist violence and no one is held accountable, how free are we? Are we free?
You know, I hope Vox, who all involved in producing and providing this, what I would call educational information, intended for it to be shared for other people to see and learn. And that's all our intent was, although I don't have permission, but hopefully it's not misinterpreted. I mean, it's information that people need to see, need to know. And a lot of the people that would, if allowed, speak on it, they are not connected into a lot of the other sources where they would come across this information. So we see it as a service. And we are a nonprofit organization who's dedicated to education and providing human services. So when, we get challenged and get blocked and you don't let it be seen by anybody, that's your business. And I understand that because at the end of the day, I'm learning too. So if don't nobody learn but me, well, I learned that. See? But it would make most sense to me that if people spend money and let it be on social media and somebody else share it that ain't trying to make money off of it or misrepresent it, if you want me to have permission, not just me, anybody, you should have on your product, right on there before we see it. You need permission, do this to get permission. And then people could do that. But for somebody to use something to try to help somebody else, and then you come back and you destroy the whole effort. And I look at that thing, like I said, it was almost an hour and a half, 3 hours and a half. And I looked, and I've been wondering, what's up with this? Then I looked at it and said, well, we blocked it because there was 3.5 minutes of da-da-da-da-da. They didn't say what it was, like I said earlier. And then I looked back. I said, well, I don't know. There was music in the videos, but I said it in that show. We don't have permission. We did not produce this. We don't have no rights. We don't claim this. We just presenting this to help educate those people that otherwise would not benefit from your information. Continue, Amara.
What is Juneteenth? Juneteenth, also known as Freedom Day or Jubilee Day, is an African-American holiday that commemorates June 19, 1865. That was the day that the last of the emancipated slaves were freed. On January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation as the nation approached its third year of civil war. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are and henceforward shall be free.
Wait, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in January of 1863 and took over 2 years for the last of the slaves to be made free?
Yep, you got it. The country was still entrenched in a bloody war, which helped to slow communications. On top of that, many plantation owners kept the news from their slaves.
Well, at least now they were all free?
Well, not exactly. While yes, the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed, technically slavery had not been abolished. Lincoln recognized that the proclamation needed to be followed by a constitutional amendment. Enter the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution provides that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The necessary number of states to agree to the amendment was reached on December 6th, 1865.
And then they were free?
Yes, they were technically free, but the situation was a bit more complicated. You see, slavery was effectively abolished, except when used as a punishment for crime. Once slaves were freed, they weren't given any help with where to go and what to do. There was basically a large body of people with nowhere to go. Immediately, the former overseer force started arresting black people for things such as vagrancy and trespassing on the only land they knew. Once convicted of these crimes, these freed slaves found themselves once again in bondage. To avoid being arrested for these crimes, some slaves made deals with their former masters wherein they agreed to work the land, turning over a majority of the crops and profits to the owners in return for being allowed to live on the land. This tactic allowed plantation owners to keep their workforce and profit while making sure that former slaves did not make enough money to start anything for themselves. As these former slaves continued to attempt to build something for themselves, they found ways to flourish and began to create the beginnings of a new future. In 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma's Greenwood district, known as Black Wall Street, was one of the most prosperous African American communities in the United States. There were grocery stores, banks, barbershops. Some residents even owned their own planes. But on May 31st of that year, the Tulsa Tribune falsely reported that a black man, Dick Rowland, attempted to rape a white woman, Sarah Page. As a result of the Tulsa Tribune's racially inflammatory report, black and white armed mobs arrived at the courthouse. Scuffles broke out and shots were fired. 12 people were killed, 10 white and 2 black. As news of these deaths spread throughout the city, mob violence exploded. White rioters rampaged through the black neighborhood that night and morning, killing men and burning and looting stores and homes. Both politicians and the media falsely framed the Tulsa riot as an uprising started by lawless blacks. The police disregarded due process, arresting blacks and interning them in detention camps. Meanwhile, no whites were arrested. In just 16 hours, police had arrested 60% of the black residents living in Black Wall Street. Mobs burned black-owned businesses and homes and murdered hundreds of black citizens. When black men joined forces to protect their homes, they were ultimately driven out in fear for their lives. By today's estimates, the dreadful and murderous 16 hours caused more than $30 million in damages. The residents of Greenwood were blamed for the death and destruction, and the government made it nearly impossible to rebuild. During the 1950s and 1960s, there began an unprecedented movement for black Americans to gain equal rights under the law in the United States. The Civil War had officially abolished slavery, but it didn't end discrimination against black people. They continued to endure the devastating effects of racism, especially in the South. By the mid-20th century, black Americans had had more than enough of prejudice and violence against them. They, along with many white Americans, mobilized and began an unprecedented fight for equality that spanned 2 decades. During the Civil Rights Movement, African Americans continued to push for their freedoms and rights, forming activist groups such as the Black Panther Party. The Panthers taught self-reliance and unity among all people while also standing in resistance against all oppressors. Like all of the other pro-black institutions before them, the Panthers were discredited, disrupted, and systematically eliminated by racist policies, practices, and propaganda. Today's activism is more widespread than ever and takes many different forms as black people and their allies continue to raise their voices within society. You can see people elevating the black experience by openly celebrating their heritage through fashion, art, music, and even the natural hair movement. Black people are taking a stand and showing their history and culture are as integral and important as any other. Injustice is being addressed head-on, and it is coming from every corner of the black community. It is being spotlighted by actors, athletes, musicians, and many more. One of the more recent waves of resistance is being led by the Black Lives Matter movement, which was started in 2013 by Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi. This organization was originally formed as a response when a young boy named Trayvon Martin was racially profiled, stalked, and murdered for the crime of wearing a hoodie and walking home while black. His killer was acquitted using the controversial Stand Your Ground law, which has time and time again been used to justify the assault and murder of black people, while seldom protecting their rights. A new movement was born, and you can see the effects today. So as you can see, we celebrate Juneteenth because it was the beginning of the future where black people began their struggle for equal rights and treatment in the United States of America. Every black person you see is an extension of those brave souls who had to carve out a place for themselves in this country.
Wow, that's incredible. I had no idea. How can I help?
Well, you can help by joining in and using your own voice to help affect change. You can sign petitions in support of various efforts to bring about equitable legislation that level the playing field for black people. You can donate your money and time to organizations that effectively address the systemic racism in place against black people. Most importantly, you can do the research on the candidates in your local and state elections and use the information to vote out officials who stand on inherently racist legislation and practices. Vote in progressive candidates who will champion a fair and equal treatment of black people. Juneteenth is the celebration of the beginning of the first steps towards making black people equal in this country. So on June 19th, don't be afraid to say, Happy Juneteenth.
All right, Amari. Once again, I had nothing to do with that information other than presenting it. If I needed permission, I didn't have it. So, they'll do what they'll do. But we're not trying to make money off of it. We're just trying to get out information. Black Lives Matter and all those other people that was involved, I thank them for putting it out there. Had they not put it out there, I would not have been able to see it. And because I saw it and I was benefited with the knowledge, I shared it. And that's as simple as I can make it. Anything I do here is simply because of the fact that I learned something from it. So I share that so somebody else, if they choose to, can learn something from it too. But, I'm trying to train myself that every time something come up to at least let whoever is claiming it, produced it, owned it, understand, man, we ain't trying to make no money. We don't do that. This ain't about that. We spend money doing this. You understand? You know what I mean? We take this real serious. We ain't making a penny. Ain't trying to make a penny. But we are trying to educate and make people aware. What else we got here, Amari? And then what we're going to do is we're going to break this thing down in part 1, part 2, because I really want to have opportunity for this to be done, although it'll be after Juneteenth. But there's music in those pieces, and that could get it scratched. The other piece is more of a current
there were more than
social
70
event piece, and it ain't no music. It probably might be scratched too. When I say scratched, I mean blocked. Now, the reason we're going to use this DACA piece is clear. Because Juneteenth, all them years. And now this. Play that piece that you finna play, Amara.
Why did she have the for sale sign on?
She was being sold. Possibly because she had been raped by a white master who caused her to have a mulatto baby, and maybe his wife didn't want her anymore. And when the Washington West family was attempting to cross the Mississippi from Tennessee to Texas, Mary Willour West got down out of the wagon and told her husband, I want you to buy that girl. And he took up a collection among the travelers, the wagon train travelers, to purchase Hannah in 1854 and settled in Sweet Home. This is my great-great-grandmother.
Do you know where they were on June 19th, 1865?
Yes, they were in Sweet Home, Texas.
Naomi Carrier celebrates Juneteenth because it's the day her great-great-grandmother, along with 300,000 other enslaved Black Texans, learned that they were free.
The day of the Jubilee they speak of, the day we're going to cross back over into Jordan, the day we're going to fly away. So they were anticipating freedom, and they knew that a logical outcome of the Civil War could mean freedom for African American slaves, whether they knew when it happened or not.
Juneteenth has taken on this kind of symbolic reverence as the day that the Emancipation Proclamation finally got to Texas. But in reality, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't actually end slavery, and neither did the Civil War. People did.
Juneteenth happened 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that was scheduled to begin on January 1st, 1863 by Abraham Lincoln. But in Texas, the enslaved people were not allowed to practice their freedom until June 19th, 1865. And people will say, well, maybe they didn't get the news in time. Well, why were they late? They were late specifically because the planters needed to get another crop in the ground, and they did do that by Juneteenth. In fact, Abraham Lincoln had already been assassinated by the time the slaves in Texas were freed.
Yes, people in Texas knew about the Emancipation Proclamation, they just didn't enact it. They considered themselves a confederacy.
The Emancipation Proclamation was more about war strategy than about freeing the slaves.